Hey guys, so just doing another review video here. So I'm going to do aquatic biomes in the water cycle. I'm trying to keep it between 10-15 minutes here. I feel like 10, right around 10 minutes is not too daunting that you'll click on and watch for review at some point between now and the test. So we went through the terrestrial biomes fairly quickly the other day. We talked about these climate diagrams. So I'm going to move on. Aquatic biomes here. So I actually have my notes in front of me too because I have a bunch of stuff that isn't necessarily in the slides, but I'll go through this and just hit the main points. So you basically have two types of aquatic. You got your freshwater and your marine. Marine being the salt involved, ocean waters, estuaries. So we'll get to that. So the first one they talk about here is freshwater, and then that's broken down into streams, rivers, lakes, ponds, and wetlands. And wetlands are extremely important part of our biosphere, the entire Earth. So streams and rivers, obviously, the water is moving. Rivers are larger, faster moving than streams. And then you have different zones in lakes and ponds. Actually, you know what? Let me go back to streams and rivers here. So streams and rivers obviously have more oxygen in them than standing water because the water is moving and mixing with atmospheric oxygen. So just wanted to make sure you understand that some of the organisms living in streams and rivers live there because of that high DO versus lakes and ponds that are more stagnant. And they may be fed, obviously, but it's not even close to the same as moving water, right? So I think you get that. Okay, so let's see here. Anything else I missed here? Oh, just another thing here in my notes, like salmon, they like lots of fast moving water, where I wrote catfish seem to be able to tolerate less oxygen, so they can live in streams and rivers that aren't moving quite as fast. So that's just an example there. Okay. And also, you don't really see algae growing in streams and rivers because they're moving too much, right? That's more here, lakes and ponds. So lakes and ponds. So standing water, ponds are smaller than lakes. All right, basically the area and size of it, the surface area is kind of what dictates a lake or a pond, is how big it is, basically. And then you got your different zones, your littoral zone, limnetic zone, phytoplankton zone, profundal zone. You got phytoplankton, which are floating algae, which is on the surface. You got your profundal zone and then benthic zone. So basically, these are very specific technical terms, right? Who knows if they're going to be on the test? The more I think about it, the more review I do here with you guys, practicing FRQs is really the best thing for you. But knowing and remembering as much of the material as possible obviously helps. I just don't know how specific and detailed they're going to be since it's a shortened test this year. So, I guess what I'm thinking out loud during this video here is, do we really need to know like the limnetic zone? I don't know if they're going to ask that. I really don't know, but it doesn't hurt to kind of review as much as we can. So, anyways, one last thought. I think they're going to hit just big ticket items, main ideas that you're supposed to get out of the class. So the definition of this zone probably isn't one of them. Is the moral of the story and why I'm rambling here. Moving on. All right. So, anyways, you can read that, right? Littoral zone is the surface near the soil for lakes and ponds where most algae and emergent plants grow. Then you got your limnetic zone here. I actually have the picture here. So your littoral zone is basically the surface near the soil. So that's like the edges. And then the limnetic zone, open water not near the soil, is what I wrote. No rooted plants, floating algae can be there. Lily pads, let's say you don't have emergent plants in the middle of the pond, right? They're near the edge. So the ones in the middle would be floating. So you got your limnetic zone where photosynthesis occurs. And so it does, so it's not just open water, but it goes down a little bit. But eventually light can't get to the bottom. That's the benthic zone where it's the muddy bottom. Now, the profundal zone, I'm sorry, I said that backwards. The profundal zone is where there isn't any light. The benthic is the muddy bottom. So benthic is the mud at the bottom. The profundal zone is the the water at the bottom where light can't reach, because light can only penetrate certain distance, especially based on the turbidity of the water, how much organic material is in the water. Detritus, right? That organic matter floating around from decomposition of organic substances, plants, fish, also waste material from organic matter. So, anyways, the light will eventually not reach. So down here, you can't have any photosynthesis, obviously. So those are your different zones, and the type of organisms that live in those zones, and the areas are because of what's going on. Is there light? Is there soil? Is there no light? No soil, All right, so let's see here. Yeah, so another thing down here, low DO, low dissolved oxygen, because there are bacteria that decompose the detritus that's floating around, right? So they use the oxygen. When bacteria do that, decomposition, break things down, they're using oxygen, so the DO will decrease. I'd hoped to do that when we got to the water pollution unit, unit 8. We were going to take samples and cover them with foil or something, and just see if there's no photosynthesis going on and it's just bacteria decomposing things, then it should decrease the DO. It works every time when you do it that way. But anyways, we never got to that. Okay. All right, 3 types: oligotrophic, mesotrophic, eutrophic. We talked about that many times. And a lot of times this is also like the age of it, right? Like a fairly youngish lake or pond would be oligotrophic, not a lot of productivity yet. And then as time progresses and succession takes over and there's more plants and organisms, then you get towards eutrophic. But also humans, obviously, with fertilizers running off, that can cause algal blooms, and eutrophication can occur much faster and not the natural progression of succession, let's say. So we've talked about those before. Let's see here. Just looking at my notes. All right, good enough. Wetlands are really, really important. We have different types. We have swamps with emergent trees. We have marshes. The marshes have no woody vegetation. That's more like cattails. Bogs are very similar to marshes, but they tend to be more acidic. Bogs also contain some trees, spruce trees. I have written down here. And peat moss. That's where you find peat moss in bogs. So bogs are a little more acidic, and they have some trees, kind of like a swamp, right? As far as emergent trees, and marshes technically do not. More like grasses, or maybe some flowering grasses or cattails in the marshes. Let's see what else we got here. So salt marsh containing non-woody, found along the coast, right? So salt marsh would be more of a mixture of fresh and salt because it's on the coast, right? So more brackish type water. Let's see here. They kind of skip over here, and what I don't like, is, oops, yeah, sorry. I don't want sticky. I don't know what the heck sticky keys. Sorry. They kind of just skip over some major details. So wetlands, freshwater wetlands, swamps, marshes, and bogs are really, really important and have a lot of ecosystem services. They take in a lot of water. So if it rains a lot, they can absorb and take that runoff and not have the whole area flood. When there are droughts, it can release that water slowly. So that's really important to kind of regulate rainwater. They are extremely productive. So they filter pollutants from water, giving clean groundwater. Birds use it. I wrote 1/3 of endangered bird species spend time in wetlands. So bird migrations and breeding in wetlands. That's a big deal. And let's see what I wrote here. More than half of USA wetlands have been drained for agriculture, and to eliminate mosquitoes. So that's not a good thing. Obviously we need agriculture and we don't want mosquitoes because they breed disease, but you can't drain half the wetlands, which we already have apparently. So that's crazy. So anyways, wetlands are very, very, very important to the ecosystem for those 3 reasons there. Filtering pollutants, take in lots of water, and they can release it if it's a drought, and lots of lots of organisms. I wrote birds, but lots of organisms use wetlands part of the time for their home or permanently, and they breed there as well. All right, so the salt marsh here. Next thing I have, this is a big deal, like estuaries, because that's where a ton of fish will breed essentially or spawn. Um, 2/3 of them spend, okay, yeah, so spawning fish and shellfish, 2/3 of them spend larval stage in estuaries. Um, so that's a big deal. Mangrove swamps along the coastline here. 1/3 of the world's mangrove swamps have been destroyed by humans. And apparently, rice and rubber trees are the problems there. That's a big one. But these are salt tolerant trees that live there, emergent trees, the ones with all the roots that are exposed. To save time, I'm not going to show you the pictures again. You can go to Florida and see these fairly easily. They also protect the coast from storm damage and waves. So those trees and the mangroves are really important for that reason. Intertidal zone, obviously that's where the tide is high or low. And there's lots of different organisms that live here. And they have unique adaptations because sometimes when it's low tide, they're exposed to the sun and the air. And then high tide, they're under the water. So they have special adaptations. Usually they can grab onto the rocks and hold on to them, right? Barnacles, sponges, mussels, algae, crabs, sea stars, all of these things here. So, but because they're on the coast, anything that washes in, oil or garbage or anything, can really affect this zone. So that's intertidal. Coral reefs, we've talked about these many times, extremely diverse, most diverse on the planet. Coral bleaching is occurring because of acidification and increase in temperature of the ocean. But lots and lots and lots of organisms and fish and animals rely on the coral for their habitat. And we talked about the mutualism between the algae and the coral and the gas exchange there, the CO2 and oxygen. So that's, something we talked about before. Let's see here. So that's kind of the gist there. I'm not doing that much. You could talk a lot more about it, but they're extremely important, and we are destroying it with the ocean acidification, with the increase of CO2. When it's exchanged, it's going into the ocean from all the excess emissions, and as well as the increase in temperature. All anthropogenic activities. Open ocean. All right, you got your 3 zones here. You got your photic, aphotic, and your benthic. Same thing. That's the muddy bottom. Aphotic zone. No photosynthesis there. Photic zone, where a lot of the organisms we are familiar with in the ocean live here, where there is photosynthesis. There are zooplankton, which are heterotrophic plankton. They cannot make food on their own, different than photoplankton. Let's see. Let's see. Hold on. I said phytoplankton, right? So, anyways, don't forget that zooplankton is a unique type of plankton that cannot make food. It's not an autotroph. But anyways, photic zone is what we're familiar with, obviously, because we're not going down more than 200 meters. But down here, you can see an example of a squid. So those are the different zones, and basically it has to do with light. Photic zone has light, photosynthesis. Aphotic, no light, no photosynthesis. However, there are special bacteria down here that can use methane and hydrogen sulfide to do chemosynthesis to generate energy. So they're in the aphotic zone. They can't do photosynthesis, but they can do chemosynthesis. Let's see here. Also, way down here, also some animals like jellyfish, squid, certain crustaceans, the anglerfish, they can create their own light, and that's how they can survive down at the depth without light. All right, so those are the aquatic biomes. Let's see how I did for time. Yep, we'll kill it there. I will do all the cycles the next review video: carbon, water, nitrogen, phosphorus. Okay, see you guys.